Hey guys, so there's a new Star Trek show called Star Trek Starfleet Academy, and I think I have a somewhat interesting point to make about it, which is that I don't think it's very good, and part of that I think is because the first episode might be too good, but we'll get to that over time. First of all, Star Trek Starfleet Academy. Oh my god, every time I want to say it, I almost say Star Trek Academy. Like it is a nightmare to have a thing called Star Trek Starfleet Academy when Star Trek colon Academy was just right there. It's so much cleaner, and I'm losing my mind. This is my pet peeve, but I'm just losing my mind slowly with the fact that like I'm also watching a show right now called Walking Dead colon Dead City, where not only does it feature the same word twice in the title, it's next to itself, Walking Dead Dead City. I'm like, it's a Walking Dead spinoff in New York, and all they could think to call it was Dead City because New York's a city. Walking Dead starts in Atlanta, a city. I'm just losing my. There's so many things you could call the Walking Dead spinoff in that's in New York that isn't Dead City, let alone naming it after the characters that are in the spinoff, which is the appeal of it. But that's still better than. I just shows up at bad names lately, and apparently I'm opening on this rant. The other spinoff that's happening right now for Walking Dead is Walking Dead Daryl Dixon. So I guess it's a better name than that, where they just named the show after the character that's in the spinoff. They're like, oh, it's the one that Daryl's in. It's called Walking Dead Daryl Dixon. And then season 2 happened because they were like, Carol's going to be in the show. Oh, but then she wasn't in season 1 really, but she's going to get in the show more later, right? So then they called season 2 of the show Walking Dead, Daryl Dixon, The Book of Carol. Like it's the Book of Boba Fett, which was also a stupid name for a show, but like the Book of Carol, all they could think to call the show is what person shows up on the screen. So I guess Dead City is better than that, but it's still shit because it's called Walking Dead Dead City. So that's where I'm coming from when I hear the name Star Trek Starfleet Academy. I'm like, you could just put Star in the title twice. You could just call it Star Trek Academy. This is not a genuine mark against the show. This is not my actual point. I'm just like, it's just it's just a dumb thing that I just have to mention going in. Okay, so I come to Star Trek from a very specific perspective. Like I'm so special. I grew up watching TNG a lot. I watched a lot of The Next Generation in a completely random order because I grew up hanging out in the back of my dad's shop with a television that had the antenna rabbit ears, and one of the only channels I could get was KQC 58, which meant that I would come home and I'd watch Animaniacs and then The Simpsons and then Star Trek, and if I was there really late, like Third Rock from the Sun and stuff like that. So I watched, and Frasier of all things. So I grew up watching like Star Trek and Frasier back to back most days of the week, and so I keep meaning to do like a rewatch of all of TNG before I even start Picard, and maybe just watch all of Star Trek ever chronologically, like release order chronologically. But that's always like a nightmare goal that I'll never do because it's just so much television. But Star Trek is really interesting because I feel like it had played a really important role in making me who I am today in some ways. Like it was all about these philosophical dilemmas and these high stakes scenarios and people really having to stop and think about stuff. But it was also about this utopian future, at least an attempt to present a utopian future where like people don't eat meat anymore, at least not from like slaughtered animals, and they don't care about money and wealth and property anymore. Like the people on the Enterprise are apparently just a bunch of people that like want to go on adventures and want to play a role in bettering their society and the societies in like, you know, intergalactic society and so on, and make discoveries and like progress science, knowing that science is part of how they were able to have such an egalitarian society where so many things are good and so on. So from that perspective, I would like to talk about some of the cool stuff about Star Trek Starfleet Academy. So I had to say it again. Every time I'm like, I'm gonna say Star Trek. I'm gonna say Star Trek Academy. One of these takes. I say takes as if I edit these. I really enjoyed the dynamic of like what the overall setup is. Like Episode 1, we see the bridge of the academy, because this show has an identity crisis that it has to that it needs to figure out, that it kind of never figured out, which is that the Star Trek Starfleet Academy is also another version of the Enterprise. So it is a spaceship in space that behaves like a spaceship, but also it's an academy, which isn't that weird because the Enterprise itself was also like full of just people hanging out, raising their families. Like, it's like people just live on there, which is always a little wild because it was like a combat ship and involved in all these scenarios. And after time went on, you'd think after a few seasons, people would maybe move and like not live on that particular ship that seems to be involved in so much stuff. But that's what it is to make a show. But going into this, it's a bit surreal. They're like, oh, we're going to Starfleet Academy. What's that like? Oh, we're on an Enterprise, but like it tends to orbit above San Francisco. So we'll be in San Francisco sometimes, but it's also a spaceship over that. I immediately went to complaining about something when I meant to say good things, but it's partly because that thought just came to me in real time. But we see the bridge of this ship, and I did find it interesting that, and this is like briefly challenging for some people, it's just the fact that there are so many women on the bridge. And I immediately clocked, I'm like, they're inverting it. They're inverting the dynamic. Because as progressive as Star Trek claims to be, every single season basically is a bridge, especially in the old shows, a bridge where there's like 8 to 12 dudes and like 1 or 2 women at max on the bridge. And most of the time, if you see women on the bridge, it's because they're visiting the bridge, like Beverly Crusher and Lwaxana Troi and so on. Deanna Troi. Lwaxana Troi is her mom. It's been a while. She was Matriarch Benezia in Mass Effect 1, one of my favorite games. Troi was. That did not narrow it down. Deanna Troi. But like, so immediately I'm like, oh, this is interesting. So you have a female captain, and then you have these shots that really show like, oh yeah, everyone in this shot's a woman. This is interesting. And then you cut down to like the one guy that's like on one of the forward consoles, and there's a guy there, and it's like it's exactly inverting the gender dynamic, or like the gender split that the bridge normally has. I thought that was fun. I also think that Steve Shives made a really good, interesting point about the overall, like, kind of how stupid the debate is about like, wouldn't you have cured this or that thing, or wouldn't fat people not exist, and so on. Is that like you have characters that are overweight, and you have characters that wear glasses in Star Trek, and you have characters that are bald in Star Trek. And that all serves a really interesting purpose, because in Star Trek, you have this idea that everyone's the best of the best, and it's very easy to let that turn into some kind of weird Nazi shit. It's very easy to turn it into like the idea of like the Ubermensch or whatever, where everyone's super capable, super athletic, everyone's identically beautiful, and everyone has the exact same overall get up. Like the more you get towards the idea that there's an ideal human form, the closer you also then start getting to people that think that there's an ideal human form genetically and racially and so on. And so I actually think it's actually really interesting to make the point that like, yeah, there in the future, instead you can acknowledge the idea that there are different body types that just are healthy, because people have different like standards, like where their body sort of equilibrates at where their weight would be. And you have people that just look like they have all these kinds of different builds. And instead of the idea that technology would lead to like a creepy eugenics sort of like solving of people's appearances and body makeups, you'd instead have a society where people don't care about the differences, or just celebrate the differences. Also, just speaking as somebody who hangs out with a lot of gay furries all the time because I'm a gay furry. Sorry, it's just I should have front-loaded that so that people didn't think this was like a chud video because it's a negative video about a thing that chuds are mad at. No, I'm completely on board with everything except for the actual execution of stuff. But speaking as a gay furry, a lot of people actually do in fact like fat people. No matter how much Jordan Peterson wants to claim that there's like objective beauty and everything else is propaganda, there's a lot of people in the world that actually quite enjoy having partners that are larger. And that's just a normal part of life, that and like believing otherwise is just succumbing to advertising. Like, I don't think that Jordan Peterson and people like him have ever really interrogated the extent to which that they just are puppets of capitalist advertising for like beauty products and stuff like that. Like a lot of like a lot of body standard stuff that isn't eugenicsy creepy stuff is itself just there to sell products and lifestyles and gurus and self-help and all these other things, like trying to fix people all the time by giving them anxiety about the idea that who they are as a person is somehow wrong in some way. When in reality, having been watching Star Trek all along, they kept making Star Trek as all of the lead actors got heavier and older over time in the original Star Trek. By the time you get to the later Star Trek movies before TNG, everyone's a lot heavier. There's people with glasses. Whoopi Goldberg was in TNG and was heavier. Scotty was heavier. It's always been a normal part of this universe, and it's really weird to suddenly pretend that it's not. But a lot of people that complain about Star Trek for a living tend to not remember Star Trek is part of the bit, and I'm a little bit there too. Like I get it. It's a lot. There's too much Star Trek. Like I had the goal of going back and rewatching like the first like 4 Star Trek shows or however many there were during the big. Like this is an ongoing goal for like the decade or so where there was no Star Trek for a while, except for maybe the J.J. Abrams movies. And now there are more. We hit a point now where there were more Star Trek shows airing at the same time, maybe not airing at the same time, but having new seasons over the same years than ever existed in the history of Star Trek. Like we went from a universe that had like 4 or 5 shows ever to a universe that has 4 or 5 shows now, and I'm like, oh, I'm never catching up with this shit. It's too much. But no, I'm enjoying the. I'm enjoying the overall like casting of the show. I especially like the quiet Klingon character who really hasn't had anything to do yet. But I enjoy that he is this like he specifically is a pacifist Klingon, and so immediately you can read into and like he has a very flat affect. He's very introverted and quiet, but like he does like speak his mind and like give it a go socially, and he does interact with people and so on. And there's parts of it that are easy to immediately read as queer, which is funny because there's a bunch of actually gay characters in the show, which is a lot of fun too. But he's just the fact that he specifically bucks against the expectations that his society has, which are easy to read as masculine, even though in this setting, masculinity isn't really related to how Klingons behave, as far as I can tell, just because it feels like that's just how Klingons are. But it's like how it reads to us as a form of masculinity, the way that Klingons are sort of like coded overall. So having him specifically reject that and want to be like, I want to study like botany and biology and medicine and so on, and I never want to harm anybody, and I'm just and he just wants to be like quiet and reserved, but he's also just like an imposingly very, very tall character that like is unavoidably going to get attention because of how big he is. Like it's very relatable to the idea of being a very tall person who doesn't want to be big, wants to be small in the room essentially, and just wants to do these quieter things. Very personally relatable. I don't think he's done anything maybe in the whole show so far. Except for an emergency surgery in the beginning. Sincerely, he's like barely in the show so far, and I'm looking forward to him getting more time on screen. Similarly, we have a character that is like kind of has a neurodivergent codedness to him, which is we have a character who is a hologram, and I don't know if this is established in other Star Treks because I haven't kept up with the modern stuff very well. But she's just like, she's not human, and she's trying to just get what people want from her and what people expect from her, and she's kind of like trying to figure out the right way. This is also a pitfall with neurodivergent coded characters, is just to have them be actually not human, which is established all the way back with Data and so on, which is like creates characters that people find relatable in many contexts, but also kind of has an inherent criticizable element of like presenting, if a character feels neurodivergent, then presenting them as literally non-human has its own issues to unpack. But like I've been enjoying the premise of the characters. My problem is that this show is just so fucking boring. It's so boring. Like, it's pretty and some of the characters are fun, but like, it's a show so far that just feels like it's basically about nothing. Episode 2 was basically an extended meet cute between the like hacker jock protagonist and a Betazoid, where she's here from another land, and the background story is that something happened, I think in Star Trek Discovery, called the Burn, which is like an apocalyptic bad thing. It's probably like the Flux from Doctor Who or something, where it was just like a huge galaxy spanning bad thing. Didn't make it past the first season of Discovery, so I don't know what happened yet. But apparently the Betazoids have been separated from Starfleet for a while now, and they're just now potentially reconnecting. And Starfleet very much would like to have that happen, and so they're in peace. They're having political talks about what to do and how to try to negotiate and how to like get these people together. But that's the B plot that's in the background. The A plot is that Hacker Jock clearly just thinks the Betazoid, the leader of the Betazoid's daughter is cute, and so she has something going on where she has like a thing in her neck and she feels too much, which is like this is Deanna Troi once again. Like, this is like, that's who the Betazoids are. They're the people who have this psychic empathy where they can sense what other people are thinking, which is surprisingly barely established in this, even though it might be something worth explaining in the show. They kind of assume, I think they kind of mostly assumed you just already knew, but she feels too much, and so she has a thing to help suppress it, and she's trying to control herself and live up to the standards of her father and so on. The problem is there's just like nowhere for this episode to go. And these are long episodes. These are no longer tight 40-minute Star Trek episodes that were made for daytime television that had to go around ad breaks. These are bloated streaming episodes that go on for nearly feature length. Like, these are 70+ minute episodes, which I cannot stress enough is a half an hour longer than how long TV shows used to be. Like, a full half an hour longer is a lot of episode. So you expect it to be really in depth and full of crazy, like an A plot, a B plot, or a C plot, or like really in-depth philosophical debates, or like really interesting characterization and depth going on. And instead, the time is just not used well, and I'm shocked by how little happens in these episodes. And overall, you're just like, yeah, okay, so he thinks she's cute, but she has to live up to these standards. But she wants to see the outside world because Betazoid has become like isolationist. This is almost as long as Tokyo Demon Hunters. I'm sorry, it's almost as long as K-pop Demon Hunters. Like, it's almost as long as a fucking animated film that has entire character arcs, and like, think about how much it gets packed into that little amount of time in so many storylines, and then go back and watch the Meet Cute Betazoid episode and tell me that it's really that interesting. Like, if any, like the main conflict that has stakes is the actual politics between these two nations and what they're going to do. And it's resolved by a declarative statement at the end of the episode that kind of comes out of nowhere, of someone just making a big move of trust, which is not, it's not irrelevant. It's thematically tied to what's happening in the episode. But like, when you come here from Star Trek Next Generation, you're used to like the idea that like almost every ad break is going to end on like sort of like a cliffhanger of like a new revelation that's like kind of like necessitated by the format. I feel like streaming is ruining this to some extent, is that like the fact that they used to have commercial breaks meant they had to have like a dramatic beat every like 8 minutes or so to make you want to keep watching and not leave during the commercial break, basically. And so these would have twists and turns, and they were written like oftentimes like mysteries, like a Sherlock Holmes mystery or something, or like there was some kind of core dilemma, a big thing that the entire episode is at stakes that's at stake for the entire episode, and you have to like have one side win or the other side win, and it's either clear good and evil. It's like, we really want this side to win, or it's like, I don't know which of these two things is right. That's an interesting dilemma. Or sometimes there'd be a synthesis where you have to like have a compromise. You have to find a way to make everybody happy instead of having someone win over the other one, and so on. Like there were usually interesting dilemmas. Like the opening of TNG was, if I remember correctly, on top of the mess of it being a Q episode, was also just like about like, hey, there's a huge space creature and it's potentially dangerous, but like, isn't there a dilemma of whether or not the planet that it's endangering, for like the planet, we want the planet that it's endangering to survive, but like, what about the creature itself? Like, doesn't it deserve to survive on some level? Like, doesn't it have some value too? I might be misremembering because it's been a million years, but like, you know, there's something being debated every episode, and there are like twists and turns constantly about what's happening. And this is 70 minutes of watching a guy and a girl meet cute while their dads are like, I think we should become friends again. I don't think we should become friends again. Negotiations are over. Okay, negotiations are back on. And you're like, what the fuck is this writing? Like, it's so uninteresting and it's so flat, and none of the characters are just especially interesting to me. And what gets me is that like I have been somewhat estranged from Star Trek for a while. I haven't watched it for a bit, but recently I sat down with a friend of mine because he thought Star Trek was boring and stupid. And I was like, okay, let's sit down and watch The Measure of a Man, the season 2 episode where they debate Data's humanity in TNG. And I haven't seen it forever. And so I was like, maybe it won't be as good as I remember. Who knows? It's probably like kind of stuffy. Like it is like a cheap, it's like a cheap sci-fi show from like the late 80s that I watched in 4:3 on antennas when I was like 10. So it's like, maybe it doesn't hold up that well. I'm trust falling this right now. Let's just check it out. I had a great time. The Measure of Man is a really well-paced, really interesting episode. It's really involved in the debate of Data, but also like they do this over the course of a tribunal, essentially, where there's two people that have to face off against each other as like the lawyers, essentially, over Data's fate. And the one on our side, the opposing lawyer, the lawyer on our side is Picard. So that's already interesting because he's a very good performer. But his opponent is Riker. So Riker has been forced to do the job of a lawyer, essentially, and being like, it is my job to present the best possible case against Data's humanity. And he has to like navigate this, like thinking like, oh, like, I hope he doesn't take this personally. Like, I feel bad about this. I'm arguing that my own crewmate isn't a person, but I have to do as best of a job as I can, because if I don't, this gets declared as being like essentially like a mistrial, and somebody that's more ruthless and cares even less about his fate will probably just replace me and make this worse. So like I have to come in here and be a horrible dick to my own crew member and so on. And so it's like this really interesting dilemma between characters that we know debating the humanity of our own favorite boy, because everyone's favorite boy is Data. And like this is in a season where it's also been a dilemma of like the Dr. Polanski who replaced Beverly Crusher for one season and frankly should have just stayed because I like her more than Crusher. Sorry. I think Pulaski is a great addition to the cast, and I'm very annoyed that she just disappears at the end of the season and is replaced and never mentioned again, I think. But over the course of the season, Pulaski starts off not respecting Data, not seeing Data as a person, and over the course of the season has like kind of like had a variety of encounters with him and has an evolving perspective on Data, and that's really interesting. And so she has her own perspective in this episode about Data, but also the person that comes in just for this episode to cause this problem in the first place. Well, there's the doctor. He's just a dick. The one that wants to tear Data apart and dissect him and probably kill him in the process. But the person with the authority over this whole thing is another ship captain who comes in to sort of be the judge over this whole thing. And she could just be nothing. She could just sit there and be a judge. It's a 40-minute episode. They don't have time. She could just sit there and just be a judge and do judge stuff. And like, oh, yes, that's a good point, that person said. That person wins the case. We know what judges are. But we've seen a million shows where the judge shows up and they just sit there as the American ideal of a neutral party that is honestly mostly fictional and not really accurate to the biases of actual judges and so on. But like their job is to just be the impartial character. So if anything, not showing them be a character outside of being a judge leads more credence to like the judge-aganda of the idea that this judge is like a perfect impartial judge. But instead, we learn that this judge has a long history with Picard, and she gets a whole series of standalone scenes with Picard where they're digging into their history and how things soured between them, and the raw nerves that are unresolved between these people. And it makes her an interesting character that is like a fully formed person in a way that she shouldn't be, because she's in like 10 minutes of an episode once in all of Star Trek, and she's a really good character. And I'm like, I know it's not fair necessarily to compare the premiere of a new show to what's often seen as one of the best episodes of all of Star Trek. I get that. But I'm saying like this is so emblematic of what I'm looking for in one of these shows. Like all these in-depth characters, really interesting dynamics between them, but also really interesting performances and interesting dilemmas and questions and things to think about. I want to be engaged the entire episode intellectually. And unfortunately, setting your show in what's functionally a high school really, really, really hurts the show's ability to be that kind of thing, because it's already been revealed multiple times that entire tests or dilemmas that these characters have had are just like artificial tests set up by the teachers, and they're like basically fake scenarios. But also like in the episodes like this, like because the main characters are the students, we're just stuck watching the boring jock be like, and I say boring jock, I know, I saw the first episode, we'll get back to it, but in the show, the moment that we're done with the first episode, he just turns into a boring jock. All he does is be disinterested in everything and too cool for school and hot. There's so little to this character so far, even though he's arguably the main character of the show. In the actual episode by episode format that they're establishing so far, he's so fucking boring, and there's nothing to him, and I don't like watching him, and that's a bummer because he drew me in the first episode. But like, it's just not interesting to watch him meet cute. And in the second episode, it's like, oh, they're getting pranked by the other neighboring academy. There's like a military academy that's not Starfleet, that's like right next door. They share courtyards and stuff, and they're like, we're mad at you, and they're being dicks to each other. So they just do like low stakes but embarrassing like college pranks on each other, and that's the episode for most of it. Once again, for like 70 minutes, because these are like feature-length episodes. Like this is a movie of just like college students doing pranks on each other, and them having to like learn to work as a team to overcome the other guy. So in the middle, they play like laser tag football, and you gotta watch them learn to work as a team. Like that's the dilemma. Like it's not Measure of Man. It's not any of like the things that people liked about Star Trek. It's watching a bunch of high school / college students learn to work as a team for like an hour. And you're like, I've seen this a million times when it wasn't Star Trek. And I came to Star Trek to watch Star Trek. I know that it's like, there's people like, well, there's room for this too, is a response I've got before when I complained about this on social media. But I'm like, I guess, but like, to be clear, I also just think that the thing I'm watching isn't very interesting. Like, it could not be exactly Star Trek, fair, but I think that what it's doing is just not that interesting for what it's doing either. Like it's not fun to watch. There's so little depth to it and so little performance to it. And one of the things that's really getting to me is that like at this point we're like 4 hours into the show, and some of these characters are just nothing. Like we had the initial impression of the hologram girl. She's somehow made of holograms, and as a person, I don't know if there was like a part where like the people in the holodeck became real, and that's like a species now in Star Trek. Maybe I genuinely don't know what hologram people are, but I can accept that it's a sci-fi show. We can dig into what it means to be a hologram person. Nope, she's like not anything so far. She barely does anything. She's there for a couple comic relief moments an episode, and otherwise has no real anything going on, really. The most interiority we get from her is when she specifically is badgering the other hologram guy, who I think is a returning cast member from an older Star Trek show, because I think I recognize him, but I think it wasn't TNG. I think it might have been Voyager or Deep Space Nine. I'm not your Star Trek expert. I'm not here to be your encyclopedic Wikipedia guy that knows everything about everything. Like those interactions are fleeting but interesting because she gets to actually be a character for a moment. But there's just like nothing going on with her. Meanwhile, there's a guy who's just like, I'm like the jock guy, but even dumber and more stubborner. And he has like one moment where I'm like, by the way, I'm an alien. And it's like, the most depth you get from him is that he had to be perfect all the time. And the moment he wouldn't be perfect, his parents would abandon him. Which is an interesting little bit of depth, but that's just monologuing at us about his backstory. But his on-screen performance for 3 episodes now has been basically nothing. Just not a character, really. Just deeply boring. It's also a weird duplicate of the fact that one of the other characters is already an admiral's daughter, and she much better carries the entire mantle of like, I am somebody who has a lot of expectations of me, and I have to be perfect, and I have to try way too hard. And you can see the insecurities crack every now and then whenever she doesn't stand up to her own reputation that she holds for herself too. It's like she's already a better version of his characters as far as I can tell. So I'm like, why do we need this character? There is another Klingon that has way less depth than the Klingon I like, which is that there's a one of the teachers here is a Klingon, and she is just a season 17 Flanderized version of her own character. Like, she is so flat and boring that like they'll be like, oh yeah, I'll meditate on that, and then say, I'll meditate on that, and then the because she always has to talk in Klingon mode, and then the captain is like, oh yeah, and what do you normally meditate to? And she's like, decapitation. And I'm like, bro, you are a main cast member. Like, I understand that sometimes Klingons talk like cartoon characters when they're only going to be on screen for 3 minutes of a Star Trek episode, and then they're not going to be in Star Trek again for like the next 8 episodes. Like, it's just like, oh, the Klingons are here for a bit, like the enemy Klingons or whatever, or the Klingons that you're coming to some kind of moral conflict with might be a little cartoonish when it's like the extras in the background. But Worf was an extremely interesting interrogation of masculinity and fatherhood and so on. There was so much going on with Worf, and he was so cool as a character, just trying to unpack these really specific dynamics and how he deals with these kinds of things. And decades later, when you're hoping that the franchise is evolving and getting more interesting, we have a blue Klingon that just goes like, decapitation, as like a punchline. Just over and over again. Like, she does versions of that joke several times an episode, every episode. And I'm like, you're a teacher here. Like, this is like worse than Harry Potter world building. Like, the level of just like, you're just a cartoon character and this place just somehow functions somehow. Like, she's not struggling with like the dilemmas of like, how do I deal with like my culture versus what Starfleet demands of me and the expectations of these two different things. How do I square this circle and so on? And she's also like doesn't have any kind of interesting depth to like being a warrior in the Klingon race and having these like specific codes of expectations to her there. She just loves murder and loves saying that she loves murder constantly in the same way over and over again. Like, she's like, it's really feels like there's like a hell of a boss character in the middle of Star Trek, like, because there's just like a flat, this is my one thing, haha. And I'm like, you've had so many scenes now and they're doing nothing with you. So like, this is what I'm struggling with, is that this season is I'm only 3 episodes in, but it's been so much screen time in nowadays terms, having almost 4 hours of television. That's like half a season already in many cases. When you talk about these shows that have like, when they have like 8 40-minute episodes a year, I've got like nothing from most of these characters. My favorite performance is probably the captain, and that I'm very tickled by the idea in a Doctor Who sense, like in Doctor Who. The Doctor keeps regenerating and having a new personality and overall vibe, and like that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out and how this new version of the Doctor is going to run the show for the next 3 seasons usually. Like how Ncuti Gatwa differentiates himself from Matt Smith and so on. So like seeing this one, it's kind of like each time you get your captain is kind of regenerating into the new Star Trek captain you're going to see in this new show, and like how is their dynamic going to change things up? This captain / headmaster or whatever they call her in the show, she is very different from Captain Picard. She likes to spin in her chair. She tends to sit very bisexually, just a crumpled mess of limbs in her seat with her shoes off. She has a very different demeanor with a lot of people, and part of that is because she retired, and then they brought her back because they needed her. So she's got no one to impress. It's actually a really good characterization that she's like, y'all need me. I'm just here because you guys are a mess. So she's just there to fulfill a role, and she doesn't have to really maintain crazy levels of decorum necessarily. So she gets to be very quirky and self-indulgent because she's very old. She's apparently hundreds of years old because Star Trek, I guess. I assume that she's human and it's like just a medicine thing, but I just whatever. But she's very old and already retired, and then got brought back out of retirement because people needed her for that. And so her characterization there makes her performance very fun and her dynamic very fun, and I enjoy watching her in the show. But this is where we get to the problem, which is that the first episode exists. Because these two what I've talked to you about this is like a silly high school drama thingy or whatever, and you got a quirky principal who's also a Starfleet captain or something. The first episode opens on a starving woman and her child helping to capture a space pirate, but then being implicated in the acts of that space pirate, and Starfleet's ruthless commitment to the law, meaning that she has to be punished because she was implicated in the behavior of the space pirate who did lead, where the stuff that his behavior and the deals that they struck did lead to like people's deaths and so on. So she gets punished even though she helps get him captured. And this leads to the separation of her and her child, because she has a 5 to 8 year old son, and he's getting roped up in all this, and so she gets arrested and sent away to like a labor camp for 15 years. And this child is going to become a ward of the state, but instead he escapes and vanishes for that entire duration. We then pick things up again, and this child is now in a prison because he keeps getting messed up, and he keeps getting wrapped up in all these messes. He's like an alien prison where they're probably going to like chop his hands off for stealing. But that same woman that's responsible for what happened to him tracks him down and gets him out of prison, on the premise being that they can together. The premise being that she is going to bring him into Starfleet to protect him, and from that, maybe within Starfleet, he can find his mom finally, who has apparently escaped the labor camp recently, and track her down. And this is all that woman's attempts to make amends for a horrible, horrible mistake she made 15 years ago that separated a mother from her child. And it was just it was a combination of her and Starfleet just making the wrong call and this policy being wrong. Child separation, crazy stakes, very strong start to a show. I'm so engaged in this show and curious where it's going. But then in episode 2 and 3, that woman is the quirky principal. Being quirky and funny, teaching you life lessons. And all of that moral weight is just gone immediately. And it doesn't even slightly feel like the same show. It feels like they grafted that pilot onto the show after it was made, with how little it feels connected to them. and the child is the jock. So the main character Jock we're following throughout this thing is a child who was separated from his mother when he was tiny, survived on his own, like in the wilds / cyberpunk cities of whatever underbelly Star Trek has, I assume. Not a people person, not good with people. Probably hasn't been around that many people. Probably has been surviving on his own anyway. But throughout the whole show after that, he just is a super normal high school jock guy. He has quips. He has specific turns of phrase and references that feel like he's just a normal person in society that didn't have a wild backstory that would have really isolated him from behaving like that way and saying things that he does. It's just not his character. It just does not feel like the same character. It doesn't feel like that child would reasonably become this person. And I don't know for sure because we don't see what his life was like, at least so far. But I'm like, unless he was like taken in by, like, at this point, in order to reconcile this character, you have to like retcon in that he was taken in by a foster family, that he like a found family kind of thing, and like lived with them for like 10 of those years. And then something tragic happened and he was separated from them in a very like Dave Filoni Star Wars like prequel show retcon that tries to characterize the gaps in the story here. Because like it's really, really hard to connect the really strong and interesting intro of the show to the Starfleet Academy show that you then have to watch for the next 3 hours, and it never doesn't just not. It's not just that the plot lines haven't come back yet. It's that it doesn't feel tonally similar, and it doesn't feel like the characters that were in both parts of the show are the same people. But that leads to our next problem, which at the first episode also has an issue, which is that it's a J.J. Abrams movie. In the first episode, we're introduced to the Academy ship, and it gets attacked by the same space pirate from 15 years ago. It's tiny universe here. I know it's because like he sent a signal out, so he found the same kid from 15 years ago and tracked him down and so on. But I'm just saying, like, it feels weirdly small to have him show up immediately again, as opposed to like being a season finale thing, which he should have been, which I'll get into, because. It's Paul Giamatti too. What a great character actor to have. Like I love seeing Paul Giamatti in things. Like great casting. I'm happy knowing about Paul. I watched the first scene of the show, and I was like, oh shit, Paul Giamatti's in this. This is gonna be cool. But he just shows up again and he attacks, and it's like a threat to the entire academy. Everything's blowing up. Students are being thrown into walls by explosions. It's like a crazy crisis, insane escalation out of nowhere. And all of the main characters, who we don't even know yet, but will be the main characters of the show, the entire ensemble, all band together as a team and drive him out and like do a multi-pronged plan that's being executed simultaneously across the place that take care of so many different crises and address so many things and ultimately win the day. In the first episode, like one, Paul Giamatti coming back in the finale and causing this exact dilemma and them having to do this exact series of things, that makes sense. Because that's like, oh wow, look how they've grown. But instead, we don't even know them yet, and they already do everything perfectly, basically. And you're like, what? And then the next episode's going to be them doing fake laser tag football to like learn to work as a team, which was what the pilot did. Like they've already worked together as a team in life or death circumstances, but now they're back to being like petty high schoolers who kind of hate each other and don't get along at all, and they can't do basic things together. They can't just listen to each other for 5 seconds to have a plan. Like, the male perfectionist asshole won't listen to the female perfectionist asshole about a plan. Even though in the pilot he literally risked his life to do her plan. Like, they trust each other already. Like, it's so shit. It's so shit. I'm so sorry. I'm sure people like this thing, but what the fuck is this show? Like, and this is what I was getting to from the get-go. I just a million other things to talk about, but I'm like, the pilot is too good of an episode of television in that it's actually entertaining and has stakes because it's a J.J. Abrams movie. But it also is a terrible pilot because it ruins the show. Because if you go in expecting the principal and the jock to be interesting because of the intro, then you're gonna watch the rest of the show in agony so far, just 3 episodes, because they don't feel like the same characters. But also all these little bits of like, we gotta work as a team and learn how to trust each other. I'm like, you literally bet your life on her plan the moment you met her in the first episode. What the fuck do you mean? Like, if anything, this should be a show about people who are like bound by flame, like forged in the fucking forges of war right out the gate, and these people have a connection to each other. And you feel like an insane person when like the rival school is doing like petty pranks on these people, and you're like, these people saved thousands of lives 5 minutes ago. And you're like, it's a pecking order contest, or we're going to do teleporter pranks on each other. And like, do you know who you're fucking with? Do you know what they did like yesterday? Just insane television. It's so bad. I'm sorry. I can't rectify any of this. I reconcile any of this. It just doesn't make sense. And like, it could just be a boring episode it could just be a boring show that's kind of building towards something and just not my cup of tea. If you just look at episodes 2 and 3 in isolation, the format of the show, that thing, I could just be disappointed that it's like, I just doesn't feel like Star Trek, and I'm kind of bummed out they're doing that. And on some level wonder, like, who's that for? Like, if you call it Star Trek could be multiple things, but on some level you want like the stakes and the dilemmas, right? Not just high school drama. Like, that's a whole separate conversation. But once you see have the first episode in there, you're like, okay, well, this is just bad because these things don't work. I don't understand how this happened.